Hey everybody, welcome back. Last week we talked about how to generate story ideas. This week we're going to be talking about how to flesh those story ideas out, how to take your unique premise and milk it hard, generating a story that feels complex, rich, deeply imagined, and special. We're going to do this by plumbing the promise of the premise. I'm Jane, and this is Fiction Technician. So, what is the promise of the premise? Well, this is a concept from Blake Snyder's screenwriting book, Save the Cat. And essentially, it's everything that is uniquely cool or intriguing or funny about your premise. If that sounds vague, sorry, but this definition is broad because the concept is broad, and it's going to look a little bit different in different stories. Plumbing the promise of the premise may mean that you need to go digging for all those little bits and characters and tropes that feel like they need to be here for this story to feel complete. Your premise comes with certain expectations baked in, and it's your job to fulfill those expectations in an interesting way. For example, let's say that you're writing a comedy about a bunch of Star Trek actors who have to go on a real-life space adventure. Well, there's got to be the away team scene, and there might be a character who's aware that he's a red shirt, and there's always the threat of a catastrophic transporter malfunction. Those things have never seemed safe. Or plumbing the promise of the premise may mean that you need to do a bit of imaginative invention. Your premise raises certain questions, and it's your task to answer those questions in the most intriguing way possible. For example, let's say you're writing a sci-fi show about the last remnants of humanity in a war against killer robots who happen to look human. Well, one of the questions this raises is, how do robots die? And perhaps you decide robots' memories are downloaded when they die and recycled in the next model. Well, that raises intriguing character possibilities. You could have character relationships that last beyond death, and you can have the robots engage in battle and espionage tactics that mere mortals couldn't attempt. Galaxy Quest and Battlestar Galactica were two properties that really plumbed the promise of the premise, and they generated stories that felt uniquely fun and delightful, or deep and intriguing. I'm going to show you how to plumb the promise of the premise, and we're starting with a list. We're going to pretend that it's 1995, my name is J.K. Rowling, and I'm sitting down to write the first draft of a story I'm calling Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The first step of plumbing the promise of the premise is to try to express our premise as X plus X. In this case, we're going to express it as boarding school plus magic. And then we are going to work through this. We're going to come up with the characters, settings, and events that make sense for each aspect of this premise. And ask, can we give them a little bit of a twist to make them make sense with the other aspect? In a school, we've got characters like teachers and a principal. How can we make that make sense with magic? Maybe we could have a principal who is a powerful wizard and a teacher who can turn into a cat. And then we move over to the other side and we ask ourselves, what characters make sense in a magical world? Well, you've got elves, trolls, maybe giants. Could a giant be a fun character? But how is he going to fit in the school? Maybe he's a half giant. And should he be a teacher? Well, you don't think of giants as smart. Maybe instead he has an affinity for nature and he could be the gamekeeper. And now I've got a fun character who can be a powerful ally or adversary for my protagonist. And then we move down to settings. In a school, you've got the lab. Maybe that could be a potions lab. And what are settings that make sense with magic? Well, castles. Maybe the whole school could be a castle. That would be really cool. And then we move down to events. What kind of events do we have in a school? Well, sports are big in school. Maybe there could be a sport that they do on brooms. And what else goes with school? Well, detention. Detention in a magic school could be scary. In reality, this list would be a lot longer, but you can already see how it has generated some intriguing story possibilities. Once you're done with this list, you're going to want to file it away. And each time you need a new character setting or are ready to start on a sequel, you can pull it out and see if it sets some sparks going. The next step of plumbing the promise of the premise is to ask ourselves, what questions are inherent in my premise? And we're not looking for the most simple, straightforward answer. We are looking for an answer that generates a few story possibilities. So one of the questions inherent in Harry Potter is, if this is a magic school, can anyone learn magic? And I could decide, no, magic is hereditary, but that does feel a little straightforward, so I'm going to change it to magic is mostly hereditary. But sometimes non magic people have a magic kid and the reverse. And this feels just a little bit more interesting. It generates a few possibilities and makes things a little less predictable. The next question we ask ourselves is what possibilities exist in my premise that don't exist elsewhere? And we did just decide that magic was mostly hereditary, so that does provide some intriguing possibilities. We can have characters like Lily Potter and Petunia Dursley, who, despite being sisters, grow up in different worlds. And this really is at the heart of Petunia's resentment and mistreatment of Harry. We could also decide that because magic is not totally hereditary, there is a bit of instability and insecurity among the top wizarding families. They can never really be sure that they will maintain control, and this fuels their terrible prejudice against the kids of non magic parents. The last question we're going to ask ourselves is what problems are inherent in my premise or in the invention I've done so far, and what's the coolest way I can solve them? Well, I decided that the school would be in a castle, but am I just gonna plunk that down in the middle of London? It should probably be in the country, maybe a secluded spot. But if that's the case, how will students get there? And to solve this problem, I come up with the Hogwarts Express, platform 9 3/4, and now I am rolling. My story is feeling unique, memorable, deeply imagined, and special. Is all this making sense to you? If so, please jam on the like button and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications if you never want to miss a thing. Check out.